right, a few days has gone by. How are you guys looking back, and what are you looking forward to as it pertains to Sean O'Malley? I read a headline. The headline says, tonight, Sean O'Malley takes a step backwards. I click on it, I read this article, I'm going to pick this thing apart. I don't want it to be true. That's my feeling when I go into this. I don't want this to be true. I read that 3 days ago, and I've thought about it periodically for 3 days. I'm not positive it's inaccurate. I'm not. This is interesting, guys. So Sean versus Pedro ends. And history says you would rematch them. Now, when the one completed round, those official scorecards get turned in, the media gets a hold of it and releases it, and Munoz won that round. So you now have a guy who had to stop a contest, no fault of his own, who has an injury. He ended up having a scratch on his cornea. Oh, by the way, who was winning? I mean, history says you rematch him. Whatever's next for Sean is going to be big and it's going to be meaningful. That's not a guarantee for Pedro, but now that you look at the pieces and the guy was hurt, oh, by the way, he was winning anyway, you feel very compelled that whatever happens next for Sean has got to be equal for Pedro. We can't just make that happen. You can't just make that happen. All you can do is prove that you would like that to happen, that would be a correct solution, if possible. So you rematch them. That is definitely on the table, but do you guys want to see that? Was that match interesting enough? Is that match and what you saw and possibly even the conclusion of it make it more interesting now? Because a lot of times that's precisely what happens, which is why these rematches historically do get made. Is that the case? Because I could see a very reasonable solution where Sean just goes, moves on, does something else. Same with Pedro. Heal up, get better, let's see what happens. But I can't guarantee you guys it's going to be equal for Pedro. I cannot guarantee you that Pedro is going to be on a main card. It's going to be on a main card of a featured pay-per-view. I can't do those things. So where do you lean? Straight up question. What would you do? Rematch them? Let's just forget this. Let's take everything out of the war. Let's get this done and get it right and see what happens. Maybe. It's definitely something to consider, but Sean O'Malley is in the back doing media. Henry Cejudo is off camera but in the back. He interrupts Sean's piece. Henry literally yells at Sean. Now, these guys are tied in not only within the division, not only with interest in the fans, but these guys are both from Arizona. That means something. What you want to do with it or where exactly the push and pull is there, it's a fine piece because when Henry interrupts Sean, Sean's response was so organic and real. Henry calls a lot of guys out. Henry does stuff just to get the attention. Sure he does. So when Henry calls out Sean, Sean literally says to me, really? But that's the spot that you'd have to be. Like, hey, Henry, before I can respond to you, of which happens to be recorded, are we really agreeing? You're asking me to fight you. If I accept and say yes, can I go through life knowing I've got to prepare because I'm going to be facing you? Sean said all of those things by simply saying, really? And I don't know that he got an answer. I don't know that Henry said anything less in that moment of, maybe. Or maybe I'm going to move on to somebody else as soon as I see them on camera holding a microphone. Right, it's one of those interesting spots. What is going to happen? How serious should I take this? And O'Malley really disagreed with and possibly had the most vigor in his voice when he found out at his post-fight press conference in the scrum that he had lost the first round. He completely disputed that. The person who said it, and said, well, we've actually seen the judges' scorecards and you lost the first round. Sean thought they had it wrong. Sean's wondering what hey, recheck that. There's no way, that's impossible. In fact, Sean thought he was on his way to winning the second round, of which he could just cruise through the third. I do not think that Sean was reworking history. I think that's really what he thought. Would that add a motivation? Would that change the likelihood and the prospects of redoing it? My interpretation was Sean lost the first round. My other interpretation was on purpose. somewhere through that round, Sean decided I need to use this to gather clues. Somewhere in that round, Pedro was either faster or Pedro kept a little more distance. Pedro did a few spinning things. Pedro was doing something that Sean had not successfully identified on film and prepared for, and he was using that round to learn what these things were. That was my interpretation. But Sean shut that down. That's not what that was. Everything was going just fine. I was winning that fight. Those judges saw it wrong. So I'm merely adding for you because when Pedro came out and told us about the cornea, I mean, that's the first thing Pedro's thinking about. He's thinking about his health. He's not thinking about what's next, his future, where to spin this. But also, inadvertently, he hasn't offered us anything in terms of getting back in there with Sean. And I had a guy on Twitter, by the way, really bothered me. When I do a piece and then I get misquoted, I mean, you could see where that would be annoying. But when somebody misquotes you, which changes the entire tone. The guy was saying that I was being disrespectful to Pedro, that I said he was faking. That he could have gone on and was looking for a way out. No such thing was said by me. Pedro was poked in the eye to no fault of his own, which is what I said. I never thought that fight would be stopped while they were in the interim of checking on him. Other than Pedro was blinking in a way. He was making facial movements in a way that was telling a story. He was attempting to tell a story through that. I was right in that assessment. He was. The story that he was attempting to tell to make sure that we all saw, my eye hurts. Which is precisely what happened. There was no disrespect on that. That's accurate. Does he want to get that match back? Does he want to talk about the fact that he was winning? Does he want to share that he thought he was winning the second round? Where is this going to go? Is there going to be any fire here? Because until we have some forward motion, the statement that Sean O'Malley has taken a step back, I don't want that to be true. But if you don't go forward, you went back. I understand that concept. So what is the bright side from here? Where do these guys go from here? O'Malley, specifically,